Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Colin Davis, who's the Director of Analytics for Kiewit Data Services over at Kiewit. Great to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And cool. Just to start with, then, tell us a little bit about your role, your background, how you ended up in this role, and what you've been focusing on for the last couple of years.
Sure. So I think, like a lot of folks about my age, I didn't necessarily set out to pursue a career in data and analytics, right? And I've had conversations about that with a high school or a collegiate advisor, if you will. So I actually went to school to study business. I studied finance and marketing, and I had this idea I wanted to work in technology, but I felt my calling there was more on the business development or the sales side. I happened to graduate during the peak of the financial crisis, so sales jobs were not prevalent at the time. So I took this operational role, kind of an operational pricing role at the freight brokerage here in Kansas City. And about 6 months later, that turned into a data and analytics role. So I worked as kind of a junior data analyst up through a senior data analyst there, focused a lot on pricing optimization and sales enablement strategies. We had a sales staff of about 1,000 or so. Really enjoyed that, learned a ton, had some great mentors. And then from there, I had the opportunity to go to an educational software organization where they were looking to start their analytics journey and looking for someone to start that with them. And it was a great opportunity for me to come in and kind of build and lead that from the ground up. So I spent a number of years there, again, focused a little bit on sales enablement, but really got into B2C revenue generation. And my favorite piece of it was building customer-facing analytics solutions. So actually working externally with customers. I found that extremely engaging. During that time, I also went to grad school, and I like to say I sort of studied academically what it was I was trying to practice on a daily basis. That was very enlightening for me, and I feel like I grew a lot during that period. I was learning something at night and applying it the next day, which is, if I could recommend that to anybody earlier in their career, I would highly, highly recommend that. And then, eventually got the call to come to Kiewit, and the opportunity there was to lead the people analytics organization to start. And that really appealed to me because I'd spent so much time in kind of revenue generating roles, which I loved, but this was a completely different angle. And, I wanted to challenge myself. Does the same analytics process sort of work in this non-revenue generating role? So I took that role with Kiewit. It was a great opportunity to come to a very well-known, well-respected organization. And within about a year, I started to take on additional responsibilities. So as you said today, serving in a director role, but I have responsibility for the employee verticals, our safety vertical, and our procurement vertical as well.
Awesome. And as I mentioned before, I really want us to get into how analytics can make those positive safety changes as well. But
Sure.
just to begin with, you mentioned that you've gone from this sales role to analyst to people analytics. It's quite a diverse background, but it sounds like you found your calling in data analytics. What do you like most about the space?
Yeah, so I guess personally, some of my favorite, parts of my job are, I like to dig in and find sort of these uncovered gems or this insight that other people don't yet know, and then figure out how we can actually leverage that to drive change in the business. So like that truly is very exciting when you find something. And sometimes it's, and we can get into this too, but like sometimes, it's the more advanced data and analytics and some of the more advanced modeling that's necessary to uncover that insight. But you'd be surprised, I would think, about how much low-hanging fruit there is out there where you can do some fairly basic things and find some very obvious and fundamental changes that you need to make as a business. And sometimes the recommended, sometimes you find this insight and the difficult question is, okay, what do I do with this? But there's other times where you find this insight and there's a very obvious remedy to the solution, and being able to help drive that and see that impact on the business, I think is extremely rewarding.
Absolutely, and the turning those insights into action is really where the rubber meets the road, I think. Again, we'll touch on this a little later. So I was going to ask you about storytelling and the communication, how you got to that level. I'm going to hold off on that. So,
okay.
With the the wider data analytics space, you've got quite a diverse background. So just in terms of the specific industries, how do you see what is your overarching view of data analytics today? What do you think about in general the state of the data function and the progress of data-driven business transformation?
Yeah, so I love this question. So if I think back to the books and the articles I was reading in grad school, which feels like it wasn't that long ago, but I guess it was maybe 2014, 2015. I read so many pieces of content that were focused on, this is what you need to do to sell your executive team, your C-suite, on why you need to invest in data analytics. It's going to give you this great competitive advantage, et cetera, et cetera. Here's some strategy and tactical tips and tricks. We're not that far removed from that, but I think the state of data analytics today is, very much not about, well, you need to invest in data analytics to gain competitive advantage. You can almost flip that and say, if you're not investing in data analytics and not doing so very seriously, you're at risk of becoming obsolete and really falling behind, right? So it's no longer, to me, this thing you can invest in to gain competitive advantage. It's slowly, and I don't think we're there yet, but it's transitioning in my mind to become like almost any other business function, marketing, operations, sales, et cetera, where the competitive advantage is not having a marketing department or a sales department. It's how well does that department execute on how they deliver value to the business. And I think data analytics is becoming very much the same way, where and again, I don't think we're there yet, because for most organizations, analytics is still in this weird space where, does it go to IT? Does it roll up through product or finance? Is it completely embedded to all these different functions where they have their own analyst resources? But I do think eventually we'll get to the point where data analytics is one of those core pillars of the business. Again, just like a marketing, operations, sales, and how competitive your business is and how you win is going to be how good those teams are.
So you mentioned earlier the low-hanging fruit, and specifically when it comes to the companies that will do well, were the ones that execute on the business value. So what do you think are some of the best examples of low-hanging fruit for, say, legacy companies? Because we're not all Apple, we're not all Facebook, we're not all doing these kind of tech-driven, and we're not all tech-driven companies, right? So where are you seeing the most low-hanging fruit, let's say?
So I think the where is difficult, because in my experience, it's varied widely, business to business, industry to industry, focus to focus. But what I do think is worth noting is that I think there's, and I love the way you phrase this, because the focus should be on how do you maximize value to your organization. So as a data leader, it should be, how can I maximize my and my team's impact on the organization? It just so happens to be that my tool set is data and analytics. But I think there's this temptation in our kind of world today, and I don't know what's necessarily driving it. Maybe it's all the advanced companies that are out there doing very, very advanced things, but there's this temptation to think we need to be doing the most advanced data science and data analytics in order to get ahead. And I think if you go too far down that road, you start to blur the lines between, okay, well, but what's the value proposition? Because I've built advanced solutions, machine learning models that offer a lot of value and utility to the organization. So that's great. I've also built very basic tabular reports or basic data sets or simple dashboards that have also had tremendous impact. But the focus needs to be, what are the biggest problems we need to solve, and how can we drive value? Not necessarily what's the fanciest thing we can build. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and this is something that comes up all the time, is where the people who are actually on the tech facing side can get lost in their own capabilities, as opposed to addressing a specific business problem, right? And actually, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective from your previous role in people analytics, and some examples of where that it's not really a conflict, but the disconnect really came from.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Here's an example on the people analytics side specifically. We were our team was inundated with all sorts of requests all week long. And we actually started to track this and understand how much time are we spending answering these super basic questions to this very broad and diverse audience across the organization who's asking for non-sensitive information, just very basic information. It could be, employee headcounts by, that meet these parameters, et cetera, et cetera. Our team is spending 40 to 50 hours a week collectively trying to answer these very basic questions. Well, instead, we spent a couple of weeks building a very simple solution and another week of training to empower the end user to, basically pull this Now, I guess I'll step back. There is a step where we have to sanitize the data that we're going to share with the business. But once it was sanitized, we just open it up to the business as long as it's, non-PII, non-sensitive information, all that good stuff. And, that alone took 50 hours a week that my team can now repurpose. Maybe we do go build a more advanced solution. Maybe we work on, I want my team working on problems that, they and only they are qualified to go work on. And I don't want to be paying a high-powered data engineer to sit there and run query after query for simple data pulls. So I think that's just one example of, how a very basic solution can offer a lot of utility and free up capacity for the business.
So with that in mind, then, what do you think are some of the best ways for, let's say, more junior analysts to become more business facing?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a real challenge. The obvious answer to me is I guess a couple of things. So one, I think it matters how the organization is set up. So if I'm a junior analyst, I would want to look for an organization where I am either embedded or connected to the business. And I'm not saying that the analytics function for the organization can't be centralized, but it needs to be centralized. And okay, if you're data analyst XYZ, well, you go support this team because you need to sit with that team. You need to connect with that team. You need to interact with that team. And you have to absolutely learn the business because it's going to make you better at your job. So I challenge my analysts, my team members consistently to, when you're trying to solve a problem with the business, you need to have several conversations with them. We call them intake discussions, but you need to have several conversations with them until you get to the point where, as close as possible, you see their business challenge that they're facing through the exact lens that they see it. Because then theoretically, you are equipped with these technical skills, your knowledge of the data, and these fancy tools we have to go build a great solution. But you have to first get that mindset, that shared mindset of what problem are we solving for. Another point is, I will stress that I think on those intake discussions where you have, an analyst trying to understand what the business problem is that they're solving for, I don't think anything data related should be part of that conversation. I think the conversations go sideways when it's, what data do you want to see? What types of graphs would you like to see? That's where you start to let the non-technical user get into design. Not to say that that's wrong, but that's, in a perfect world, I have an analyst who's deeply connected to the business. They really understand the business problem. They are the ones who are then best equipped to go design the right solution because they have that technical expertise. So just one more point about that. More junior analysts, I have never seen, in my career, a stronger technical skill set at a very junior level, like I've seen over the last couple of years. It's incredible. I have interns that can write really advanced Python scripts that 6 years ago I would have thought a very senior data engineer would be required to write. I haven't seen the same type of leap in the business acumen or the business understanding or the business application of analytics.
You mentioned that the organizational setup needs to be a particular way in order that analysts and more senior analysts and data scientists can support business functions. So my question would be, is this the role of data analytics leaders in big companies? Is it to spearhead that organizational change and that business transformation to facilitate that kind of environment? Is it to act as a conduit between the analytics function and the business function? Is it both of those things and more? Is it something else? What do you think?
I think 1,000% yes. I think, as strongly as I can say yes to that, that question. That's how I feel about it. So I think that I'd go a step further. I think the analysts, so I think there's multiple models that can be successful. So I'm not trying to say there's one or only one way to do it, but I do think that I see the data analyst, your senior data analyst, those are the people that I say have, from the skill set perspective, they're jack of many trades, master of few. Like they can do a little bit of everything. They can do visualization, they can do engineering, they can maybe dabble a little bit of data science, but they're not a full-on data engineer or full-on data scientist. But the role that these people play is they should be more closely embedded to the business, where I think you might be able to have a standalone engineering or a standalone data science function that doesn't necessarily need to sit with the business. I firmly believe you have to have analysts in the business because that domain expertise is so critical. And while I expect it out of the data analysts, it's 10x expected out of any data leader, because that's the only way you're going to get things done. Like you can't, I think there's kind of simply put 3 phases that go into a really successful data analytics solution or data analytics product. It's how well do I understand what I'm solving for? And that goes back to, okay, what's the business problem at hand? If we were to build a really successful solution, what actions would be taken? What change would be driven? How would the business fundamentally respond differently? And then further, how would that actually impact the business? What is the positive impact at the end of the day, whether it's to the bottom line or some other measurable impact? What are we trying to create? So that's kind of phase 1. Then there's the whole second phase, which is all your tech dev, whether it's data engineering, data modeling, dashboard design, whatever. And then that third phase is, okay, now we've built this thing we think is great. How do we go make sure it's useful in the business? And that right there specifically, like I think I see a lot of projects maybe not die, but they don't get off in the right direction because that first part isn't done great. And then I do see projects sort of die or stall out because we've built this thing and now we do not know how to use it with the business. The wrong thing to do is for the data leader or the data team to say, hey, we built you this tool, business, here you go. As a leader, I think you need to have a lot of investment in, it's a shared, you're a problem solver. It's a shared responsibility with you and the business to say, okay, we've now built this great tool. How do we train to it? How do we make people aware of it? How do we coach to what it is and what it is not? How do we make sure that at the end of the day, that problem we identified way back when is actually being addressed? And that should be the fundamental responsibility in my mind of the data leader, less so than, well, how advanced of solution can you build? How do you reformat the tech stack, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all like steps to get to solving problems.
Mm. And to actually get to the level of solving problems, you need to be able to communicate both fluently, concisely in the language of data and the language of business. So from your experience, and what do you think are some of the qualities of the leaders who actually get that balance right and are able to successfully communicate within the business?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of an obvious one, but like I'm a firm believer you have to have some sort of technical background to really effectively lead in a data and analytics function. Now, I'm certain that there's examples of folks out there that maybe don't have that and are successful in their own right. But the vast majority of the time, I do think you have to have that technical background. And to be clear, I'm not saying you have to be the best data engineer, the best data analyst, the best data scientist, whatever, in order to move on to that leadership role. But if you have the technical experience, that's going to allow you to really empathize with your team, first of all. It's going to allow you to better develop and grow your team and set expectations for them and hold them accountable because you know enough on the technical side to know when something's moving too slow or trying to go too fast. And I just don't think there's any replacement for the perspective that working in a technical hands-on role gives you into the analytics process. And if I had to go a step further, I would say that working in a data engineering capacity specifically, I think is the most critical, because that gives you insight into the data pipeline from collection, storage, transformation, sanitization, whatever. It's just so critical. So I think a technical background is super important. I think, and I kind of already alluded to this, but having that problem solver mentality is incredibly important. It's not a if I think back to those 3 phases, right? It's not this little development phase. This is what I own, and I don't own anything before that or after that. It's how can I partner with you, different business leader, help me to understand your problem. I want to go attack it with you. I want to make the business better. That's what I'm motivated to do. It just so happens how I do that is I have data analytics teams and I build data analytics solutions, but I'm really here to solve problems and to create value for the business. And then the last piece that comes to mind for me, and this is harder to articulate, even to myself, but it's as a data leader, especially as your teams grow or your responsibilities grow, you have to look for opportunities to scale yourself. And I got this advice like 4 or 5 years ago, and it didn't really resonate with me, but each year since then, it resonates more and more. And what I mean by that, or how I look at that, is as a leader, I need to focus not just on the technical solutions we build or my relationships with the business. I have to focus on how do I create and then cultivate the right culture on my team, and how do I do the same thing with process. So it's culture and process to me. So culture is, I can't be in every single meeting. I can't review every line of code. I can't understand how we prioritize every single initiative we're asked to do. But if I establish the right culture, mindset, approach, philosophy on my team, if we literally document, this is who we are, this is how we're going to operate, this is who we're going to be, and we drive that effectively across the team, then the team starts to respond in the appropriate way. And then similarly on the process side, you can't have 10, 15, 20, 30 analysts all building things in their own way. And I'm not sitting here trying to restrict all creative freedom, but without process or structure, you get complete chaos. So how do you put the right level of rigor to process to say, this is how we're going to code, this is how we're going to do data visualization, this is our approach when we are asked to engage in a project, we're going to follow these 3 or 4 steps. How do you put that in place and get that running on your team to allow you to step back and then go focus on either building relationships, solving the higher level problems, whatever the case may be. I think that right there is that's a really challenging skill set. And that, I think, is the reason why your best data engineer, your best data scientist, whatever, may not always be your best leader, because it's who can do that.
And the $1 million question, which I won't ask you today, is how do you create a strong data culture that actually enables the business to do that? Because that is the number one question we get, right?
The one thing I will say on that is, and I'm learning this, consistently. You have to drive it every week, every day, every month. It's not enough to document it, and this is some self-reflection and probably some self-critique, right? It's not enough to document it, put it in front of people, talk about it once every 6 months or so. You really have to drive it over and over again until it becomes habit on the team. That's the one thing that I think is really consistent. Whatever your culture is, you as the leader have to drive it and set the tone.
Absolutely. I think it was Jocko Willink, who's ex-Navy SEAL, who said, if you can just point at people and tell them to if they did what they told you, then there would be no need for like a chain of command or a business organization, right? Because people would just do it, but that's not how people work. People work on emotion and psychology, and there's all these different triggers that work for them. So it's really about fine tuning that, I think. And actually it'd be interesting to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this from a safety analytics perspective, because safety culture is obviously huge in industries like yours and companies like Kiewit. But how have you gone about embedding safety analytics, or what are some of the things you're doing in terms of safety analytics to make that more data driven?
Yeah, so I think so first off, this is a very straightforward problem statement, which is good, which is how do we, and then take the data analytics out of it, right? It's just how do we keep our people as safe as possible? Every single person, this is industry wide. Every single person can get behind that. It is a tremendous focus, I will say, at our organization. We take a ton of pride in our safety culture, but at the same time, it's not enough to reduce especially severe injuries and fatalities. The goal is to eliminate them, right? And I think that's, I'll speak, I don't represent the industry, but I'll try to speak from my perspective on what I've learned so far in this industry. So I think that is the the industry initiative. What we've done so far is we've taken the data we have available today and we've put it to use the best way we possibly can, right? So how do we take the data? The challenge is, how do we take the data we have today and position it in a way, whether that's through data modeling, reporting, alerts, et cetera, to keep our people as safe as possible. However, and this is more of a generality, and I've run into this several times, like that's usually not enough, right? It's if you're given a problem statement as a data scientist or a data leader, your mind usually starts to go to, well, this is all the data I would want to go try to solve and tackle this problem. The reality usually is, well, this is the data I have available, right? Because I mean, the company's been around for well over 100 years. The data collection tools we've used have shifted or altered over time. The data that we were collecting, in 2010 was not collected with the intent of how do we go build predictive modeling in 2022 or 2025, right? So I think there's kind of two parts. It's let's build the very best we can with what we have today, and is there utility in that? And we believe that some of the stuff we've done to date, there is, but you can't accept that as being, well, that's where we stop because that's what we have today, right? It's I believe my job and responsibility to some extent to say, okay, what could this be? And then how do I go try to influence and get support for what it's going to take to go build this tool that could be, let's say, an A+ version of this tool to get more targeted, more predictive. And at the end of the day, again, go back to our problem statement that's very simple and everyone's rallied behind. How do we keep our people as safe as possible? How do we send somebody home the exact same way they came into work? And I'm really excited about it just because I think as an industry, we are at the start of this journey, most likely, like of what this could be. And I'm really intrigued to see where this evolves over the next 5 or 10 plus years, because I think the opportunity longer term is very, I think there's a lot that data analytics can do to influence job site safety or just safety culture in general, whether it's manufacturing, railroads, doesn't have to be construction.
Mm. And it's the paradox is that data is very, technical focus, but actually when you talk about the specific problem, as you mentioned, it's something that can resonate with everyone. You might have an organization where they use analytics to improve their marketing or get more sales, which isn't something that everyone can get behind, right? It's wanting to create and foster that culture, I think, is something, especially in your industry, that could be really useful. So I mean, specifically maybe not in that case, but when we talk about influencing key stakeholders with data, like leveraging data to influence strategy, what kind of messaging are you sending out? Because I think that when you frame it, like, for example, the safety analytics, you say, okay, here's what we're trying to do with analytics. It's very hard to say no to that. So what are some of the other ways that you're looking to you leveraging data to influence strategy? Sure.
So going back to that example, I think the very best thing you can do is to build something. And I'm not saying it needs to be a product, right? And in this sense, we've built product one, and then we're trying to, we hope to leverage that to say, here's product one, here's what it does well, here's what we think it could do so much better. But here's the angle and the investment we think it might take to get it to be better. So let's get a plan together of how we're going to go attack that. That's a little easier, but it's also a larger investment. But I think the build something approach works in all sorts of different scenarios. So the point being, if you want to rally somebody around an idea of what a data and analytics solution could be, it's very difficult to just speak in concept. Okay. So I may have this vision for what I think the solution might be. And if I try to articulate it to you, there's no guarantee. In fact, there's a high probability that what you conceptualize is not what I'm conceptualizing. Right. So it can be a basic mock-up. You can build something off of fake data. You can build it partially off of fake data, off of real data to kind of show, here's what we do today. Here's what it could be. Whatever the case may be, I come back to build something, because that's much more likely to engage and influence a decision maker. And it's also much more likely to get across your vision for what it is you're trying to articulate. If that's not an option, which maybe it isn't in some cases, I think I have a bit of a recipe that we try to follow for, okay, if I want to influence or persuade, what are the ingredients we need to do that? First and foremost, you need credibility from the presenter. It needs to be someone that has credibility in the organization, whether that's yourself or whoever. And that's something that, as an aside, I think you should be building every day, right? From the moment you walk in the organization, everything you do, the quality of the output, the way you manage your relationships. So you have to be credible. You should, as your podcast's name, I think you have to tell a compelling story or business case, right? It's, data with the narrative, possibly some visualization, but make it compelling. And it needs to, at the end, have a call to action. Like you have to have a specific, I've seen presentations that are actually pretty good at the first two. And then I'm kind of like, well, what is it specifically you're asking for? Are you asking for permission to go work on something? Are you asking for additional headcount? Like what do we want to be the outcome here? And if you're trying to influence, I guess, with an analysis, right? So sometimes it's, here's this analysis we did. Here's what we found. This is really, really valuable. If we, this is insightful, we should make some sort of change. Well, you better go partner with the people that are going to help you make that change prior to trying to sell this idea. And you better have some good recommendations on what you should go do based upon that insight. And it shouldn't just be the data analytics team coming up with that on their own, right? You need to partner with the folks that are actually part of the process, part of the business. And then I guess the last thing I would say then, this isn't always possible, but you're going to have a much better chance of success if you're focused on a business problem that whoever you're trying to influence cares about. Trying to make somebody care about something they don't yet care about, it's not impossible, certainly, it's just more difficult. But if you can find a business problem that somebody, they have some passion for, and especially if you have some passion for it, I think that'll really shine through in how you present that data, and you're much more likely to have a positive outcome.
I love the idea of the analogy of the ingredients, because if you, with like of any good recipe or like for a cake, for example, you don't have the sugar, it's not going to be a real cake, or it's going to be a pretty bad cake, and this is all brilliant. Making someone care about something they don't care about is the hardest part. You could be the most passionate advocate in the world, but if you're not communicating that message in the right way, and also, as you said, framing it in the context of you need to care about this, maybe they don't care about it and they need to. Paint the picture of here's what's going to happen if you don't. I get paid at the end of the day. I'm trying to help you, and actually creating that narrative is a crucial part of data-driven business transformation. And this is where I think the soft skills come in, things like communication, influence, persuasion. And my next question then would be, how important have those soft skills been in your ability to build fruitful relationships as a leader?
Yeah, I think as I do self-reflection or self-evaluation around my career and where I want that to go, I view my soft skills, my ability to communicate, to understand the business, to work with the business as being personally my number one asset, right? So most people in this space, they're either business oriented and they become technical. And I think that's the minority. And especially today, most analysts, data scientists, whoever, there's a very deep technical background, and then they're trying to embed within the business, to learn the business, to be more business focused, if you will. So, I do think having a business understanding and a high business acumen is to me, a critical ingredient for a data leader. Again, think back to those phases, like you need to be approaching almost every problem you're trying to solve, not as a data problem, but as a business problem. And your approach or methodology to alleviate that just so happens to be via data and analytics, right? And then I guess specifically on the relationship side, so this probably spans well beyond data and analytics roles, but it's certainly relevant to them as well. But it's wise, in my opinion, to look around the business and understand whose help am I going to need. So you're not going to be able to build great, impactful data analytics solutions on your own. You're not going to be able to build them in a silo. you're going to need help to actually take whatever you build and release or position it in a way to where it actually has impact on the business. I can think back to projects, like one of the more successful projects I've ever worked, probably had 8 different departments involved, with data analytics being at the forefront. We built a data science model. We built a dashboard on top of it. It went out to our external facing customers. But if I had to attribute, a little attribution modeling here, if I had to attribute the success of that project, it was probably 80 to 85% the relationships that I had across 6 or 7 different teams, marketing, sales, product, whomever, that resulted in success, and maybe only 15 to 20% how good our model was or how good our dashboard was. And to be fair, I really think our model and dashboard were very good. I think the product was great, but it took all these different groups pulling in the same direction to make it successful. And then I think one thing you could say, or somebody could say, is, well, relationships or no relationships, isn't it those people's jobs to support you, right? It doesn't, the marketing team gets paid, the sales team gets paid, whomever. And, to a certain extent, yes. But I think this is just kind of an obvious question, right? Like, who do you think you get better support from? Someone that doesn't know you, someone that knows you and dislikes you, or you don't have a good relationship with, or someone and you have a good relationship with, right? Like, they're going to naturally be inclined to want to help you. And I feel this, it goes 2 ways. I feel this all the time. I have people reach out to me for stuff that, oh gosh, it's that work I really want to take on right now. It's probably not a top priority for us, but okay, can I do 10% of the effort of what they're asking me to do? If I do 10% of the effort, does that get them 50% of the way there? And I'm motivated to think like that. Why? Because I have a relationship with that person. I don't want to let them down, right? So I think that's, you're going to need help. And the better relationships you have with those whose help you will need, the better likelihood for successful outcomes of whatever it is you're building.
And that's the whole principle of the 80-20, right? Putting in 20% of the effort that will get you 80% of the results. So I love that. And regarding those relationships, you mentioned there was 8 different departments you're working with. Did you have those relationships existing from day one at Kiewit? You kind of identified those key players and started building that on a long-term basis, or was it more of a, okay, we have this project, I'm going to start kind of greasing the wheels on this kind of thing?
So I'd say in that particular example, the relationships were already there, somewhat naturally, because this is a previous organization. I'd been there 2 to 2.5 years. So I knew most of the parties I needed to work with, and just naturally, those relationships had kind of evolved. So in a sense, got lucky, right? That those were already in place, because those are really necessary. However, I will say when I came to Kiewit, I was a little more targeted when I first started, right? And I had some help from our head of HR at the time, who kind of guided me towards, okay, and there were a lot. Hey, here's 30 people that over the next 2 to 3 months, you need to establish a relationship with. And, at that point, it's as simple as reaching out and introducing yourself and saying, hey, here's kind of what I'm about. Here's what I value. Here's what I hope to bring to the team, to the organization. And that's just the very start of cultivating that relationship. But, some of that needs to happen, I guess, naturally. I'm not saying you should be, super tactful about it or disingenuous, I guess. You want the relationships to be genuine, but you can still be targeted in making sure that, okay, I know that relationships are key to my success. I need to go get to know these people, to understand them, to let them know me. And another thing that they've been really critical about, specifically at an organization of Kiewit's size and scale, is, and I think many people in my shoes, whatever organization they're at, probably feel this. You're going to create more demand than you can actually meet. So you're going to be asked to do more than you can do, which means you're going to have to say no. And so reaching out to someone that you have a good relationship with, that is asking for some project to be done, and having to call them and say, hey, looking at our current roadmap and the level of effort it's going to take to build what you're asking for and the value proposition behind it, I'm sorry, but I don't have a strong business case here to prioritize this. I want to let you know that. But then we usually try to offer something such, like I said earlier, hey, what if we can't do this grandiose thing you're asking for. But what if we did this? Does that get you even halfway there? And honestly, what I find half the time is, oh, well, that's all I really needed anyway. Right. So it's, if I can have the ocean, I'm going to ask for the ocean. But yeah, if you get me this, I'm good. But my point being, as you cultivate those relationships, as you're asked to take on more, it's possible to actually use what could be a negative conversation and actually strengthen the relationship based on how you communicate that and how you're transparent. And again, I think it goes back to being, genuine with that person. Like, I would like to help you, but hey, understand my constraints of what else I'm being asked to do. I can't do that right now.
That's so many good points there, and I think that it's really good that you mentioned that you don't become this disingenuous relationship builder who's just kind of using the politics of the organization to move up and move your agenda and move that forward. Because I think when you have this genuine relationship, this genuine connection that's built on a foundation of trust, not only do you want to take those projects on, but when you do want to let someone down, they know you're being sincere about it, and there's that, look, I'd love to help you, you're a great guy, but it's just not going to happen. Can I do this? And then that's how good relationships work. And also it reinforces belief in the data function. If you don't have those relationships and you just cut someone out cold, what's the chance they're going to come to you again, put a proposal together, send it to you? You can actually help. It's going to be much lower. So actually, I think there's two sides to this trust building, and when you were looking at those relationships and looking at how you can serve the business with data as a tool, what do you think are some of the best questions to ask when you're trying to build trust? What is your approach or process for reaching out to these key stakeholders and then establishing that relationship?
I mean, I think it's as simple as just trying to understand their perspective. So, and this goes two ways. So trying to understand their job, their position. What are your responsibilities? What do you really care about? What's frustrating? What's challenging? Yeah, that builds the relationship, but that's also giving me information from a data perspective of, I got, my antenna going up in the background of, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we could help solve for that. I wonder if they know that we might have some data that could help alleviate that issue. Or while you're talking about something that is just a lot of complex manual steps, I think there's a way that we might be able to automate that with a data pipeline solution. Right. So I don't have this set of questions I go through and ask all these folks to try to understand their business, but it's more of, a little bit, I think, about our conversation today. We don't have like a specific roadmap of where it's going, but it's just a conversation that sort of one thing leads to the other. But your job, in this case, my job, is to, I'm just trying to understand the business as they see it. Because if I can do that, I'm really confident I'll be able to help you in a meaningful way, assuming we can, get the work prioritized and all that good stuff. But if I don't see the business as you do, then there's this disconnect where you may be asking for something that I don't quite conceptualize or understand or see the value in. Does that make sense? Like you can't, I think it's, I think it was an Adam Smith, like the invisible hand, makes this point where you can never fully empathize with another individual and feel exactly what they're feeling. It's impossible. But if you try, like generally speaking, you can get somewhat close, right? So I'll never be able to see the business as an HR director or as a safety district leader or as a sales director, because I don't see myself serving in those roles. But if I have enough conversation with these individuals, if I ask good questions, well, maybe I can get pretty close, and then I can leverage my skill set to better help them.
Mm-hmm. So true. And I think that I was actually going to touch on the empathy side, because when you have this base level with this decent grasp of emotional intelligence, you don't need to ask, okay, what is your job title? Okay, or what do you, here's what I think your data needs are. Is this right? And these are very closed-minded questions in a way. When you have that open approach, and you can actually look, as you say, try and step into someone else's shoes. The world is too subjective to think you can actually think what that person's feeling, therefore project then that's humility. That's the quality of a good data leader, is having that, being humble and actually being open-minded, and also being courageous by asking these good questions, which can sometimes be hard questions as well. So I'm loving everything that I'm hearing. And with the wider organization, because we've spoken a lot about the key stakeholder engagement, how do you approach educating the organization, let's say from a data literacy, data fluency perspective, to let people know that you guys exist?
Interesting. Well, that's a little difficult. So that's actually outside of my specific domain of responsibilities, right? We do have programs for that, but I do think that, you know, myself and my team and the breadth that we cover, we try to educate our stakeholders the very best we can. And I think that the way to do that is to be transparent with what solutions. So when you build a solution, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can't just sort of set it and forget it. You don't just build it and then move on. All right. There's a responsibility there, I think, to help your end users to understand what that solution is, what it is, and just as importantly, what it is not. I think this is most important on the predictive modeling side. I think that has the largest room or capacity for misinterpretation. Is, oh, there's this data science model. Well, I expect it to be right every single time, and I can't wait to just call out all these examples where it isn't. When in reality, and every model is different, right? But you know, a decent data model may still be wrong some portion of the time, a fair amount of the time. That doesn't mean it's not a good tool. But it also means that here's the data literacy piece: is we need to communicate to the end user of, in this case, let's say a data model, this is not black and white, yes and no, you know, trust this and only this 100% every single time. This is a tool. Here, let's be transparent about the accuracy of this tool. We think it's going to be right, certainly a lot more than it's going to be wrong. Therefore, over the course of time, yeah, we think there's a lot of value in it. But what I want you to do is I want you to utilize this tool as a data point, combine it with the other context you know about your role, and hopefully arrive at a better decision more often than not. And that's, you know, there's certain models where we'd like to get to where maybe we don't want them questioning as much, but like the point being, when you release a solution, you need to be transparent about what it is, what it isn't. And it's not, all models aren't the same. All data tools are not the same. There just needs to be, I think, greater education to your end users or your stakeholders on how to get the utility from whatever it is you've built.
Well, Colin, we're almost out of time now, but I'd love to keep going, and we've got some really great insights from you today. So thanks a bunch for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll be in touch again soon.
Awesome. I really appreciate you having me, and look forward to continuing to listen to you and Laszlo in the future.